One thing that you mentioned that I have a question about is the idea of taking custody of the money. And you mentioned this on our last conversation just briefly, but as a kind of amateur crypto person, I have a Coinbase account. I transfer money from my checking account and I buy my crypto. It sits there in Coinbase. And you were saying, and there's a lot of fees. You're right. If I transfer that, if I want to cash it back out, I got a tax event, I got fees. If I want to buy more, I got significant fees. And it's not in my possession really at that point in time. What you're talking about is there's ways of truly taking that out of even like a Coinbase and having it in some sort of, I've heard of these wallets, like the cold wallets. I don't even know the terms.
Hardware wallets. Yeah. So
yeah, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So one thing that's different about cryptocurrency versus, let's say, like buying like a stock is that you can take self-custody of it, where you can take it off of the exchange. Now, you have to be careful here, right? So there's many different ways that you can get exposure to cryptocurrency now. It used to really just be that you would have to go to a crypto exchange and purchase it there. And before Coinbase, a lot of this was really just available on overseas exchanges and such. And I'm sure many of you have heard of some of the nightmares that occurred with bad actors out there, like FTX, for instance, where millions of people lost their shirts and lost all of their investments there. And that's because if you leave your coins on an exchange, you have third-party counter risk that you're susceptible to. But a lot of people, when they heard about this stuff, they said, see, I told you crypto's a scam. And I laughed at that because I want to give you an example that I think everybody can understand. Let's say I was buying Apple, and I was buying Apple on one of the online exchanges. Let's say I was using something like Fidelity or TD Ameritrade, right? And I put my money there from my checking account and I purchased shares of Apple. Now, if all of a sudden TD Ameritrade apparently was a bad actor, they were misappropriating customer funds, they were being risky with it, and I lost all my money there, nobody would go and point the finger at Apple and say, see, Apple's a scam. It's the exchange, right? It's the same thing here. And don't get me wrong. There's plenty of cryptos out there that are scams because there's a lot of these pump and dump schemes. There's tens and tens of thousands of coins. I'd say probably 25% at least are actually scams or bullshit coins. They call them shit coins. That's the proper terminology. But there's several that are good that actually have what's called utility, that are serving a purpose, solving a problem, making things cheaper, more efficient, crossing borders. We can get into some of that stuff. But today, there's a lot more options on how you can buy it. So one, you can buy it through, Venmo, PayPal, these different things, but you're not actually getting the ability. You're getting exposure, but you're not getting the ability to take the coins from that and take self-custody. You just have ownership of it, but that's with them. Now, there's Coinbase, which is a U.S. publicly traded company that you can go to. It's an exchange. You can take your dollars and fund it, and then you can go ahead and purchase cryptocurrencies. That's obviously the safest method. That's where I buy most of my coins. They don't have potentially every coin that you're looking to buy on that exchange, so you might have to go elsewhere to buy some other smaller, lesser known ones, let's say, but they have the majority. So you can buy coins there. Another option today is that you can get exposure to crypto via ETFs, spot ETFs, which is essentially, you guys have all probably bought exchange traded funds. You might not know it, right? But that is essentially like buying a stock. And one of the reasons why Bitcoin's price really went exponential to 109,000 is because it was much easier to buy and it was much more accessible. The majority of the wealth in this country and in the world is the top 10% that the majority own stocks. A lot of them could be older. A lot of them might not be, comfortable going to a crypto exchange and dealing with that. But they're very familiar with telling their financial advisor, hey, you know what? Allocate X% of my portfolio to crypto now that I can. So you have spot ETFs, which is essentially being able to buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, and there's several others that are not approved yet, but that should be soon, like XRP, Solana. And there's going to just be more coming where you can get exposure to crypto. You don't have to worry about self-custody. You're buying it essentially just like a stock. And, this has been kind of a slow adoption for a long time. I remember there was a lot of big financial firms that couldn't even talk about cryptocurrencies, but there was enough of a groundswell of demand from people wanting this and to get access to it that they ended up having to succumb to creating these spot ETFs. Now, the self custody question that you're asking is, why would you even want to do that? Is it necessary? It's certainly not necessary. For some people that don't want to kind of get a little bit more involved in this, I'd probably recommend just buy IBIT, which is the BlackRock ETF where you can buy Bitcoin. Very easy way to get exposure. But if you want to take self custody, I go to Coinbase, I purchase Bitcoin, and then instead of leaving it on the exchange where you do have third party counter risk, do I think that's pretty safe spot? Sure. But there's other advantages if you take self custody. So I can take the coins and instead of keeping them housed on the exchange, I can essentially put them into the blockchain, but then I get access to it with something called a hardware wallet. It's like a little device, and you have a password. You also have a 24-word recovery phrase. And I can go anywhere in the world with this device and sign transactions and send money. If I lose a device, so long as I have that 24-word phrase, I can recover my cryptocurrency anywhere, so long as I have internet access. But you have to be careful. There's certainly a lot of nightmare stories where people lose a device, they forget their password, they lose the 24-word passphrase, and then once you lose that, there is zero recourse. So you have to make sure you're being careful and doing things correctly. But once I have self-custody, I use something called a ledger. So it's one of the hardware wallets. And I used to have the Ledger Nano X. Now I have the new one that came out called the Ledger Stacks, which it's like cool. It's like a touchscreen, very easier, much easier to do transactions with and such. But then you also get like an app with it, and you can see all your crypto that you have in your custody essentially, and not on the exchange. But then since you have custody of the coins, you can stake them for certain coins depending on their consensus mechanism. So Ethereum, for instance, you can take the coins that are in your custody and pledge them into a pool where some of them have like certain lockup periods and stuff. But if you plan on holding it, it's a way for you to earn additional yield. That yield can change, but maybe now it's around 4% a year. But other coins, they give you 15% or so. So you can earn additional yield just by staking them, which basically means you're just clicking a button on this app and it is holding it in a pool here. And then when you want to take it back from there, you can, but some may have 30, 60, 90-day lockups or more, depends on which one you're doing. But you also could borrow against it if you have self-custody. There's plenty of companies out there now in the crypto realm, like let's say like in Aave or something, where you can lend against your crypto. So there's a lot of other options and ways that you can utilize the crypto if you take self-custody. I'm a big believer in it. There's a lot of people out there that are really crypto diehards that, the saying is like, not your keys, not your crypto, meaning like if you don't take self-custody, it's not really yours, right? For the vast majority of people out there, if you want exposure and you want to dabble a little bit, I think it's perfectly fine to buy one of the spot ETFs to get access, and I would recommend IBIT.
Okay. And it sounds like the ETFs aren't even going to have the same fees you would get from Coinbase if you were just purchasing, the coins directly on Coinbase, because there is a pretty decent fee for, a transaction fee for those.
Depends. It depends, right? So depends how much you're buying. It depends on the type of order. I mean, it can be pretty minimal, but if you're buying size, the fees can be bigger. Also, it depends on the exchange you're on, the liquidity, and also not to get too technical on types of trades, but you have market orders, which people are probably familiar with. That's where you say, hey, I want to buy 10 Bitcoin, but I want to buy it right now. So what you're actually doing is taking liquidity out of the market, and you are paying for immediate execution at the best possible price. But if you have a market that's maybe not that liquid, you can have what's called slippage, because what you're actually doing is taking from the order book people that are saying, I'm willing to sell the Bitcoin at whatever price. And if you want to buy 10 Bitcoin, the price on the screen might be what's available, but maybe only one Bitcoin is there. But then in order to fill your order of 10, you actually get executed on a much higher average price. Now, you could also do a limit order. Limit order is different. Limit order is where, hey, I can only, and the point I wanted to make on that is the fees are higher on market orders because you're taking liquidity. Limit orders, you're actually like adding liquidity to the market. And with a limit order, you're saying, I only want to buy it at this price, and that's it. And you won't be executed above that. And because it's not a market order, the fees are less. But I think you'll find like most people aren't out there buying 10 Bitcoins, right? Which now, would be just short of like $1 million, right? So if you're buying fractions of a Bitcoin, which that's another key point, Bitcoin, you don't have to buy one. A lot of people have that like misconception. You can buy $10 worth. You can buy $100 worth. And Bitcoins can be split into a millionth of a Bitcoin. So it can get very, very fractional. But if you're doing, smaller amounts, the fees are pretty minimal actually. But if you can even reduce it further by doing limit orders.
That makes sense. That makes sense.